Mackenzie Winninghoff. I am the Share Program Administrator, and I will be presenting about half of this presentation. And then we also have a team member here, Juliet, who will be diving into preventing further damage and more of the construction-based support for you all this evening. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, we'll ask that you hold them or drop them in the chat, and we'll address them at the end. Since we are going to be recording this, we want to try to make sure it's as complete as possible. And then we also will be sharing this out to you all and everyone else who registered following this presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started. So first, for those of you who are not familiar with SVP, or for those of you who are, just a little bit of a refresher, SVP's mission is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. We do this through 5 interventions, which are build, share, prepare, advise, and advocate, which work to provide like a holistic and complete disaster recovery, as well as response set of offerings. And so we have our build sites, which actually are rebuilding and repairing homes that have been damaged by disasters. And then we have our like prepare, advise, and advocate arms that are doing some work to help ensure that communities are as prepared as possible before disaster and then have access to the resources that they need post-disaster, specifically around like government offerings and programs such as FEMA, which we'll dive into today. And then the SHARE program, which is the program that I am with, works to provide support to local community organizations following disaster, to help like build up their capacity and respond a little bit quicker, a little bit faster for those impacted homes and individuals. So we'll be going over these 4 topics today. So we have our immediate resources, our accessing recovery funding. So that'll go over like FEMA and insurance and how to navigate that process and provide some key tips there. And then we'll dive into preventing further damage with Juliet, who will introduce herself and provide a little bit more information at that point. And then we'll talk about avoiding contractor fraud. So once you have access to that recovery funding, once you've done some of that initial damage prevention in the home, moving on to that next step of getting some repairs done and moving toward recovery, and how we can best protect ourselves from that. So first, moving into immediate resources. We have a few different things here. So first we have our cooling and charging center. So I know Texas, middle of July, is quite warm. And so we want to make sure that those households who may be without air right now, or just, maybe without a cool and safe place to stay, especially during the day, there are some cooling centers available in the affected counties. So for specific information, you could visit your city's webpage. Typically, these are going to be libraries, rec centers, government offices, maybe even schools in the summer, things like that. But you can also visit this website, which you'll be able to click on when we send this out. That can help identify where the closest cooling center will be for you. And then we're also, if you're in need of shelter, if your home is not safe for you to stay, you can text shelter to this number here, which is 43362. And they can provide some shelter information, charging centers, and any additional information. If that does not work for you, or if you're not up for texting, we also have a number here that you can call that is through the American Red Cross, and they can also help assist you. The most up-to-date resources are going to be available at readyharris.org for those that are in Harris County or in the surrounding area. So we also recommend checking that out, as we do have these resources here, but there may be more that are being added, daily, as new opportunities come up post-disaster. For anyone who was looking for food distribution, perhaps food was damaged during the storm, or in general, there's just a need for food assistance. The Houston Food Bank always has a food and services partner locator available, but specifically in this time post-event, you can go ahead and look there to see when they might have like where the closest location might be and when you'd be able to pick that up. There's also the Food Bank of the Golden Crescent that serves multiple counties in the impacted area from both the Derecho and storms and Beryl. And you can reach them here at this number. So I'll pause for a second at the end of this slide just to make sure everyone can take down that number if they need it. We also know that post Beryl, post the Derecho storms, this is an overwhelming time. There's a lot to manage, a lot to think through as you look towards your recovery. And a lot of things might have changed, like in your day to day life, or as you look towards the future. And so we just want to make sure that if you or anyone else in your community that you know of is in need of any assistance, we have quite a few resources here. So there's the disaster distress helpline that is specifically available for those impacted by disaster. But then there's also these more general crisis lines that you can reach 24/7. Um, and then for any veterans, there's also that specific number here. So I'll just pause for a few seconds in case anyone wants to like take a picture of this. Like I said, we will be distributing this, but I just want to make sure everyone has time to take down. I know there's a lot of numbers going on the screen. All right. Next, we have crisis cleanup. So post disaster, and this often this is you may have heard of this before because crisis cleanup does show up quite often following different disaster events, and have worked in the Houston area before. But they're a really great resource that allows homeowners or impacted households to give a call to this number that's listed here, and you're able to share with them what needs you have. So if you need a tarp on your roof, or if you need debris removal, tree removal, mold suppression inside the home, things like that, you can provide them your list of needs. They will put it on a essentially on like a platform that voluntary organizations like SVP and like others can see, and one that helps them understand the need in the area, and two, it helps match these voluntary organizations who have volunteers available, willing and wanting to help, with homeowners who are in need of this assistance. And it is all for free, and it is minor repair services, so these aren't going to be, providing a new roof or anything, but it can help to prevent further damage and help get the home into a stable state, which is important for sure in moving towards that recovery process. Um, we also have this storm needs assessment. So, post disaster event, there are going to be a lot of organizations that are trying to figure out what the true needs of each community that has been impacted are. And the best way to find that out is to ask those that have been impacted. And so, if anyone has the time to be able to submit their needs to this storm needs assessment, our partner Connective will be taking a look at these responses, and it can help best determine where partnerships are needed, and what resources are needed, and help to see if we can get those into the community. Last, I know we're providing you a lot of resources here, but I hope that that's a good thing. We're hoping to make sure that we can answer a lot of the questions and asks that you may have. If anyone is having or needs access to tech, and this is going to primarily be for individuals that are volunteering or like working with an organization that is supporting Beryl or Derecho impacted households and communities. However, if you are representing an organization and you have needs for phones, computers, tablets that might help you do your work a little bit more efficiently, or might just be a help in capacity, while you're serving impacted communities, you can give this number a call here, and they will provide tech supports and services. And then last, for anything that we have not covered in this presentation thus far, or if maybe we call one of these numbers and they don't quite give you what you need, any remaining unmet needs should be directed towards 211. Regardless of what area you're in, you can give them a call and it will connect you to your nearest United Way. And they really are a resource hub that will be able to point you to other organizations, agencies, and resources that are available in the community. So, moving towards financial resources and support, which we will also dive into a little bit more deeply in the next section. But first, there are legal services support that are going to be available to you as you move forward. And so they can help to provide pro bono support for a variety of situations. So if you have insurance and you are having trouble getting responses from your insurance, or they're not maybe they're not complying with the policy that you have with them, legal aid can help to navigate those situations. If you're a renter and you're having landlord concerns, and they are, maybe in violation of your lease terms, and they also can assist with that. And so really, if you have any legal questions, I would recommend giving these organizations a call, and they can just help to provide some guidance and support and just let you know that you're not alone in navigating these very like complicated and stressful times that come around, like navigating insurance and navigating like living situations. Um, there's also going to be flood insurance specific support. So, of course, you can reach out to a legal aid if you're in need of legal support for your insurance. But if you just have questions about, how to read your policy or how to understand like what your policy actually should cover, or any other questions, United Policyholders has been a great partner of SBP. They are um, amazing. They have trainings that are pre-recorded on their website. They have guides, and then they also are available for you to reach out and ask specific questions if you reach out to their info at uphelp.org. And then there's also the floodsmart.gov that can help to answer questions as well, especially if you have the National Flood Insurance plans. And then last, I think this is last for now, we have the SVP FEMA Assistance Call Center. So we are fortunate to have a team at SVP that is dedicated to helping impacted households navigate the FEMA appeals process, as well as the FEMA application process. So if you have any questions about your FEMA application, if you haven't already submitted it and you have questions about that, or if you have applied and maybe you've already been denied, or you end up finding out that you were denied or didn't get the full amount, that you could potentially receive, you can give our hotline or email your information, and they will help you through that process. And of course, this is also at no cost, and will help to hopefully help to get you a different answer from FEMA, and help to take a little bit of weight off your shoulders as you navigate that process. And then there are these disaster recovery center locations. So these are going to be available in by county, and these are run by FEMA. And here you can go to apply for, you can apply to FEMA in person. Sometimes there will be additional organizations that are partnered with FEMA that are going to be there to provide resources. But really, it's just like an in-person location to get your disaster recovery questions answered. So here are the hours and here are the counties. I'll just give a few seconds as well so that you can take a look and see if one of these matches yours. And there may be additional locations that are added as well. So I would check back at the FEMA.gov website periodically if one of these is not very close to your house or is difficult to get to, or the hours don't work for you. I would continuously check back on that website and see if additional ones are added. But for now, there are these four. And the last thing that we want to mention, I guess, is that these are a lot of resources that we've just shared with you. There's going to be a lot more resources, I believe, that will be coming to your community. And a lot of times it's free help. And so before you dive into using your your FEMA funds or your insurance funds to pay for someone to remove debris from your house, or tarp your roof, look to see if there's any resources that can be provided for free. Sometimes it's even your neighbors next door who will see that need some branches picked out of your yard, and you can organize a group of friends and neighbors to work together to clean each other's houses. Sometimes if it's like a little bit more of a complex ask and you need a tarp on your roof, or you need mold suppression or mucking and gutting, there's a lot of volunteer organizations and churches that are often trained and available to help with this. The crisis cleanup that I mentioned is one of those. But there's also going to be like very local organizations and churches that are going to be available to help. So I would just like really check on Facebook, talk with your neighbors, talk with your friends, and see if you've heard of anyone that is helping out. And then of course, I would also strongly recommend giving crisis cleanup a call, because that's going to be one of the best ways to get connected to groups that maybe you haven't heard about yet. And then there's also going to be things that you can do DIY. So obviously, debris removal, you can do DIY. You typically can be done safely as long as you're not trying to move, like extremely large trees alone. Mold suppression, which Juliet will talk about, can be done DIY. And so can muck and gut. Of course, it's always easier and better if you have a team to help you. But at the end of the day, many of these tasks can be done at fairly low cost, and without, paying a professional contractor large sums to do it. So moving on to the specifics of recovery funding, navigating FEMA and insurance. There's a few tips that we like to just mention right from the start, and this is going to be the case whether you're talking about FEMA or whether you're talking about insurance, or even when it comes time to be negotiating with a contractor. Throughout this disaster recovery process, you are your best advocate. And that's going to feel hard some days, and you might not want to advocate for yourself every day. It's going to be a long process. We often say that recovery is a marathon and not a sprint. And so, we just want to remind you that you are going to be your best advocate. So take time to care for yourself when you need to, and then like fight for what you need when you can. And one way to do this is going to be through your appeal decisions. And so if you get an answer from your insurance company, or if you get an answer from FEMA that you do not think is just or is what is correct, we 100% recommend that you appeal it. So if you think that you should be entitled to more funds, or if you were just straight up denied and don't think that that is accurate, please appeal your decision. And like I said, like SVP is here to assist with those FEMA appeals, because we know navigating these government processes can be difficult and very confusing. But there are also, legal aids can also often help with this if that's a route you're more comfortable with. And some are able to navigate it on their own as well. So just no matter which path you take, we strongly recommend you do appeal them if you do not receive your maximum eligible award the first time. We also recommend that you document everything. So every conversation you have with your insurance company, every conversation you have with FEMA, any document you send to FEMA, you should have a copy of you should have the original, and you should only send them copies. So you can have proof and be able to read at any time exactly what you sent them, and be able to refer back to past conversations about what you talked about and what was discussed, what was agreed upon. And then keep at it. Sometimes it's going to take 3 or 4 calls to get the answer that you need. Sometimes, one person's going to give you an answer that might truly be wrong, and you might need to talk to another person. And so, if something doesn't seem right, like I said, you are your best advocate, and so go back and ask those questions. Make sure that you completely understand the situation and that you feel confident and safe in what you're being told, before you agree to anything, before you sign anything, because this is, like I said, this is a long process, and we want to make sure that you feel as good about it as possible as we move forward. So one of the first steps post disaster that we recommend is to figure out and manage what your existing financial obligations are. So if you have a mortgage, credit cards that are due monthly, utility bills, student loans, auto loans, understanding where you stand with each of those and what loan hardship deferment or forbearance programs might be available to you post disaster. A lot of times there are going to be different options. They will differ from lender to lender, credit card company to credit card company, utility company to utility company. So you always want to call, you always want to ask. Um, some of them, might have this information available on their websites, but definitely call to see what is available. You never know until you ask. And a lot of times this can help to relieve some of the immediate financial burden. Um, there's also going to be some sources of recovery funding. So once you have your existing financial obligations, let's see what additional like funding that could be provided. So there's going to be insurance if you have flood insurance or if you have home insurance. That's going to be a primary source of recovery funding for many families. FEMA will also be available through their individual and household program, and they also provide critical needs. So that's going to be, as soon as you apply, that's going to be a $750 critical needs disbursement, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides. But that can really go towards anything. There's a disaster home and property loan that can help to like replace an entire home. But again, that is a loan, so that does have to be repaid, whereas FEMA is more of a grant. And then there's going to be charitable aid. So there's going to be organizations like recovery nonprofits that are going to be bringing in homes and households that need to be repaired, and getting homeowners through that process. And then there's going to be a lot of other charitable aid too. Like you might be able to find, like some of the ones we mentioned earlier, you might be able to find aid for food. You might be able to find, like rental assistance, things like that. There's going to be a lot of charitable aid coming into communities post disaster. And then there's going to be, like we mentioned, the forbearance programs, the hardship programs to look into. And two that are really interesting and good to know about is there's disaster unemployment assistance and disaster supplemental nutrition assistance post event. And this supplemental nutrition assistance is available to households that maybe would not typically qualify for SNAP, but under these unique circumstances post event, post disaster, post Beryl, you may be able to apply, and that would be some extra funds available to help provide food. And then same thing with the unemployment assistance. So if you were unemployed as a result or in reference to Beryl or the Derecho storms, this may be a resource that is also available to you through the federal government. There are a series of pieces of information that are going to be asked almost every time you apply for aid, whether it's FEMA, whether it's a nonprofit that you're applying to. Um, so we recommend having most of this information readily available. And so, if the best idea is once is like that first time you have to collect it, just keeping it organized, like finding a folder to put it in, ideally like a folder that is waterproof, um, but just keeping it all organized in one's place, because if you've been asked for it once, it likely will not be the last time in this process. So of course, so there may be programs that ask for your social security number. They're going to ask for your insurance information, especially charitable organizations and FEMA as well. Actually, like if they're going to be providing additional funds, they want to make sure that your insurance hasn't already provided you the total amount that you need for your recovery. So they might ask for your policy. They might ask for any claim letters that show how much the insurance has already provided you, or maybe their denial letters that the insurance is refusing to cover. They're also going to ask for pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements, and this is going to help them to understand the level of need in the household. So this will help them establish like the income level, and help to best serve the household. And so the recent pay stubs or tax returns are definitely something that we would try to keep accessible. These may be ones that you have to update. Sometimes they'll ask for like the last 2 months, so these might be resources you have to print out a couple of times. But ideally, you'll apply to a lot of these very close together, and you won't have to go back for them. Very important is proof of residence or ownership. So we're going to need the deed, the mortgage, the lease, or the utility bills to prove that you were living in the home prior to the event. And that, of course, you have the right to be living in that home. And that's going to oftentimes be like a non-negotiable item for a lot of these. Programs. However, if you do have a unique circumstance, I definitely recommend giving them a call and reaching out to see if there's any options. A list of personal and household items can be extremely helpful, especially when working with insurance and FEMA, to help prove and demonstrate exactly what was lost and the amount that you should be, like reimbursed in order to replace the items. And then an actual list of damages caused. So we recommend before you start mucking and gutting, before you start mold suppression, to go through each room, take pictures or videos of the entire room, all of the walls, the ceiling, the floor, all of the contents, and create a list of what was damaged. Again, this will help expedite a lot of processes if if like the organization you're applying for can immediately understand what your needs are because you already have it written down. So moving on to FEMA's individual and household programs. So these are designed to cover disaster needs that are not met by insurance. So that's why I mentioned on the previous slide that a lot of times you're going to need to show your claim letter, or your the amount that the insurance has paid or is refusing to pay. So that way FEMA can establish like the amount of need that you have. So the most common, I think, FEMA program that you might be hearing about from those in your community is going to be the housing assistance program. And so that can provide up to $42,500, and that's specifically for the repair or the replacement of damaged home. I know you might be looking at this and thinking 42,500 is not going to repair an entire home. But what's important to know about FEMA is that their goal in providing these funds is to make sure that the home is safe and sanitary and habitable. And so like for the household members that live in that house. And so for example, if there's one person living in this home, they're looking to have one usable bathroom, one usable room, and a usable kitchen for these families. They're not necessarily looking to repair an entire, like 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom house, something like that. They're really looking to make sure that like the person that is occupying that home has a safe roof over their room. So that can cause like a little bit of confusion, I think. but it's just important to know that it will not cover the oftentimes the complete recovery, but it is meant to provide that safe, sanitary, habitable space. They also offer rental and lodging assistance. So if you are displaced from your home, you can apply for temporary housing assistance, which can either pay for a rental or put you in a hotel. Um, so definitely apply for that or request that if you need it. And then if you have someone in your household or if you yourself need a wheelchair ramp, handrails, or other accessibility needs, that assistance will also be available for either the place that you were staying in or the home that you will repair. And I mentioned earlier on that there's these $750 that are available for critical assistance services. So that's available immediately as soon as you apply. You will be dispersed the $750, and it's for immediate needs. There's really not a whole lot that you can't use this on that are related to disaster needs. However, this is not an unlimited pot of funds. So that's another reason we recommend applying as soon as possible. It's not guaranteed that every single person that applies will get the $750. So the sooner that you apply, the more likely you are to be able to receive it. And then last, there's going to be this other needs assistance for up to $42,500 as well. And this is going to be for non-household related needs. So it could be for the repair or replacement of personal property, like your furniture, your car. It can help to reimburse for transportation that might be necessary because your vehicle has been damaged. Moving or storing items that you're trying to salvage, and anything else that might be related to your needs post disaster. If you are interested in applying for this program and you haven't already, you can do so in 3 different ways. You can do it online at the disasterassistance.gov. You can call FEMA's hotline at this number here, or you can find a disaster recovery center near you. And like I said, we also have our FEMA hotline that can help you with the application or the appeals. We do mention appeals here because a lot of times households are applying for FEMA right away, and so we normally catch them more in the appeals section. But if you have not applied yet, we are also able to help you assist with this. So you can call us at this number here. I also mentioned, you may have caught on one of the first slides of this section, that there is an opportunity for an SBA disaster loan. And so what these are designed to do is to repair or rebuild like the entirety of a home for an individual household. So homeowners can receive up to a $500,000 loan, and like I said, that is like ideally that will be enough to repair or rebuild the home. And renters are able to receive up to a $100,000 loan that they can use for their needs. However, it's important to know that this cannot be used for secondary homes. So you are not able to get this loan and use it to repair a home that is not the property you applied for. So if you applied for 123 Pine Street, you can't use it for 124 Pine Street, or you can't use it to build an entirely new home that is, but also still have the original home being repaired. So it's not to provide a secondary home. It's not to build a second house on the beach. It's to repair the home that you're applying for that loan for. And then it cannot be used to upgrade homes unless it's required by building codes. So if your, house is currently doesn't have a pool, you can't use these funds to add a pool. If it doesn't have a second story, you can't use it to add a second story, things like that. Unless, for some reason that is required by code, but I can't think of an instance why that would be, when that would be required. But you could upgrade like the electrical system if that was required by code. That could be an example of an allowable upgrade. So when you do apply for FEMA, there's going to be an opportunity for a damage assessment. So going back to that damage assessment list that I mentioned, if you have that accessible and available, that's going to help to make sure that you don't miss any of your needs when you're talking to FEMA, or when they're at your house. You can make sure that you point out every single thing as you go down that list. So there will be on-site exterior assessments and then interior remote inspection. So that's another reason this is a point in time where you need to be your best advocate. If they're not going to be inside your home, understanding the reality of the needs there, this is one of those times where you're really going to have to advocate and really make it known what your needs are in that home. If you have moderate to severe damage, that may prompt an on-site inspection, and when possible, that's really what we want. Because like I said, trying to like having to advocate for yourself over the phone about every single need in your home if they're not really seeing the reality can be kind of difficult. And so when possible, we want that on-site inspection. However, if it is deemed to be minor, it's very unlikely it will be in person, and it will likely be a remote inspection via phone call. Um, one of the ways to help ensure that it may be that you're maybe able to get this in-person visit is when you have that initial phone call with FEMA. When they ask you if you have immediate needs, you should say yes. And if they ask you the extent to the damage of the home, you should truly provide the most detailed instructions or detailed explanation that you can. Don't try to sugarcoat it. Don't think that like, oh, I don't have it that bad. My neighbor has it way worse. Like, tell them every single one of your needs, because like the more that you represent that, the more likely you are to probably get put into that moderate to severe category and get that in-person inspection, which really can help to lead to the award that you truly need. Um, if you say that you do not have immediate needs, likely you will be denied for assistance. So if you think, oh, well, my roof is leaking a little bit, but that's not an immediate need, that will be an immediate denial. So again, advocate for yourself. Having your roof leaking is an immediate need, and we do want you to have that fixed as soon as possible. So again, just advocate for yourself, and yeah, answer as in as detailed of a way as you possibly can. Um, Reporting damage, like going back, this mentions that list that I talked about. It's going to be easiest to report your damage if you have that list, and you can, like I said, just go line by line and check them off and make sure you cover everything. Having photos and videos can also help, especially if you end up having to appeal, because you can send those photos and videos into FEMA and show them exactly what the damage is, and even more so if you don't get that in person visit. And important to note too that the FEMA inspector will only call or text you 3 times before they close and deny your case. So after applying, please make sure to answer all phone calls and all texts that you receive. And I know that we all are getting a ton of spam calls, and you never know like who is really the person that you want to be calling you. But please just give all the calls that come in a chance, answer it, see who it is, and if it's FEMA, then that's a very exciting moment that will be worth answering all of the other spam calls. So please don't ignore your phone. Please don't leave it on mute or silent. We want to make sure that you're getting that call when it does come. So if you decide that you do need to go ahead and appeal your FEMA decision, there are a few steps and like key things to know. So first, you are always entitled to appealing a FEMA decision if you do not receive your maximum eligible award, which is that $42,500. If you are denied, that's just the beginning of the conversation. It doesn't mean that you're now ineligible. It doesn't mean that you're never going to see a dollar from FEMA. It just means that maybe there was a box checked incorrectly, or maybe you answered no to, do you have immediate needs? Those are things that can always be like clarified. And so a denial doesn't mean no. I know it can feel discouraging, but try your best to continue to persevere. And there are organizations like SVP that can help to like be your advocate and handle a lot of these conversations and a lot of the paperwork for you. From the time that you receive that denial, you have 60 days to write a written appeal. Again, that might sound scary, turning in a written appeal, but like I said, there are organizations that can help do this. And then include with your appeal letter a copy of your ID and as much supporting documentation as you can. So that photos that we took earlier on, contractor estimates, if you've had contractors come and they've all provided estimates that are saying you need $75,000 worth of work, and they're consistently saying that, consistently listing similar tasks that need to be done, that can really help. And anything else that you feel inclined or would be helpful for your case. And last, if you do have questions, there are going to be the disaster recovery centers that are those FEMA-led in-person centers that we showed that are county by county, where you can have a one-on-one conversation with a FEMA rep. Disaster legal aid offices, like I mentioned earlier, can also help you with this process. Last, going back to the beginning, where I mentioned keeping notes. We want to keep notes on all of your FEMA conversations: who, when, what, the date, the time. Record everything that FEMA asks of you and everything you send. This will again just help if and when you do have to appeal. Keep extra copies of all documents. Please never send the original version of any of your documents because you very likely will never see it again. And we want to make sure that you hold those documents close. Please only send copies. And if you are denied, you can request your file from FEMA to find out exactly what they used in their decision, which can help to provide a more appealing appeal. And include with your appeal letter a copy of your state ID number as well, just a picture of your ID, and that will help as well. Moving on to insurance. I know I'm providing you guys a lot of information at the moment, but we will have a time for questions at the end. There's homeowners insurance, renters insurance, and flood insurance. Homeowners insurance is going to cover losses caused by wind, rain, and other perils, but not flooding. So not flooding that's caused by a lot of rain, not flooding that's caused by storm surge. That's only going to be covered if you have a flood insurance policy. Homeowners insurance policies do not include flood insurance. Those are two separate things. So you will want to check your policy to see if you have which one you have and what they cover. Homeowners insurance can cover the losses to your home as well as your property, such as furniture. And it can also cover additional living expenses. So if you're displaced from your home, it can help to cover some of those repairs. I mean, some of those costs. I've had clients that I've worked with in Panama City after Hurricane Michael, who even 2-3 years after Hurricane Michael were able to get their insurance to pay for a week's stay in a hotel while their home was repaired. So definitely something to chat about with your insurance agent. And then flood insurance is going to cover losses related to your home and property that are related to flooding. And so most of these do not cover personal property that are sitting in basements, but they are going to cover like the property that is within like the livable space in your home. And it can also cover up to $1,000 for eligible preventative expenses that were spent beforehand. So if you purchase sandbags to put in front of your home, that can oftentimes be reimbursed. And then there's also this ability to maybe get up to $30,000 to help meet building code requirements for flood mitigation. So while you're navigating this recovery, if like while you're repairing your home, there might be an opportunity to get an additional $30,000 to help make your home a little bit more resilient in with the potential of there being, more flood events in the future. So to file a homeowner's insurance claim, you're going to want to contact your insurance company as soon as possible following the disaster. And again, just like with FEMA, document everything you talk about. Those 2 to 3 contractor estimates that you got for your FEMA appeal can also be used here, or vice versa. You can use your 2 to 3 contractors estimates from your insurance claim to use for FEMA. Again, this just helps to establish like the general understanding of what the cost to repair the home will be. And then work closely with your claims adjuster, have a paper trail of your communication, make sure that, again, everything is being tracked. And just like with FEMA, this is just the beginning of the conversation. So if you get a settlement that you don't agree with or you don't think it's enough, or they want you to just commit to a contractor and they can pay them off and move on, don't feel like you have to do this. This is your home. You have to live in it. You have to feel safe in it after it's repaired. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you feel as though you have the resources, the time, and the best contractor to do that. And make sure that you spend your settlement money only on repairs and placing damaged items that are allowable under the policy. I've seen a few times where homeowners were in a bind after the disaster and used their insurance money to like maybe buy a new car that wasn't necessarily damaged in the storm, and so it wasn't covered under their insurance. And then now they're asking for charitable aid from a nonprofit to rebuild to finish the recovery on their home. And unfortunately, that does rule them out for a lot of other recovery resources and funding. So please only use the money on what it's supposed to be used for and be able to prove that you used it on the right thing. Save all of the receipts. And with that, I will hand you off to Juliet to go into some of the steps that you can go to prevent further damage before you can actually dive into this long-term recovery process.
Awesome. Thanks, Mackenzie, for all that great information. Like she just said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to prevent further damage based on what you've already experienced so far. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so first off, we're going to talk about hazard trees, and we'll have a couple pictures on the next slide. But hazard trees are going to be the trees that were impacted by the storm, and they may or may not have come all the way down. They might be partially down, or they might not be down at all. It might be a branch. But you want to look for trees that look no longer normal. And that sounds weird, but sometimes you see a tree every single day. It's in your backyard every single day, and then one day it's a little bit slanted more towards one side. It's possible that that tree was damaged and might need to come down. So that way you're not risking harming your home or a neighbor's home or your general property. You want to look and check out to see if there are any cracks in the trunk. You're looking for major root systems that are broken up or popped up more so than they ever had been before. If a tree is partially uprooted, if there's a much more significant lean to them. And then when you're looking at widowmakers, the big branches that might be stuck up in the trees, so big limbs, if they've already come all the way down, or if they are still stuck up in the branches there. It's important that you want to take care of even ones that seem like they might not be a problem because the next windstorm that might come through, they might come down and cause more damage. If they're anywhere near power lines, you want to get a hold of your power company first because they're the ones who are going to want to take care of that as opposed to having like volunteer groups come through and take them down just in case the power line gets hit because it becomes a much bigger problem for the power line or for the power company than if they were just to take it down themselves. Next slide. So there's a couple of different kinds of hazard trees here. The ones on the left you can see are all mostly fallen over. You can see a couple of widowmakers in that middle one in the number three. Sorry, I can't see the numbers super well. Number three's got some widowmakers hanging out up top, so those ones are definitely in danger of coming down. The number one, you see this tree is only part of the way down, so at some point that tree is probably going to come all the way down, and there is concerns about where that root system is going to end up. Same thing with number two, it's obviously leaning directly over that, it looks like a garage right there, so that'll just cause further roof damage, which you want to avoid. And so these are the kinds of things that you can report to crisis cleanup and have organizations that are working through crisis cleanup come and take care of these problems. Even trees that are all the way down, you can see number 4 and number 5. Those are still considered to be hazardous trees because if that root ball system where the tree was connected to the ground, if there's any disruption there, that whole thing can flop over and actually bring the tree all the way back up or hurt someone who might be standing on it. And it goes pretty fast, so you want to make sure that if you're able to take care of those, reporting this information on crisis cleanup is going to be helpful along with any photos, so that way the tree crews, the folks who are coming through, know what they need. If they need a pole saw, which is going to be a very long saw to reach your widowmaker, or if they're going to need a skilled chainsaw technician who's able to actually fell a tree, which means bring the entire tree down. The more information, the better. Next slide. So if this storm, the Beryl and the Derecho that y'all have experienced are not haven't been significant flooding, or at least the majority of folks who are reporting damage so far is not significant flooding damage. So mucking and gutting has been less so than if it was just a major storm. However, because Houston is at a higher risk, this is all just general information that's good to know. And if there's anyone on the call who is having more specific concerns about flooding, feel free to reach out and we'll have more questions at the end. But mucking and gutting is a good thing to know. That way you're able to be aware of what you're able to do on your own, and then when you need to call in other folks for help. First step is just cleaning. So cleaning out the home of any damaged items. That'll be in the way of the mucking and gutting process. Mucking is going to be pulling out any vegetative debris that might have floated into the home. These are going to be like a lot of vegetative debris, sometimes it's even debris from someone else's house. And then gutting is going to be the actual removal of impacted construction materials. So this will be removing doors, trim, baseboard, drywall, carpeting, all those different things that make up your home, that give you your home structure, but have been impacted. And when you pull it out, that way you're able to dry the home out more effectively and then be prepared for mold suppression and mold remediation. Next slide, please. So by the book definition is going to be the removal of muck, mud, silt, and other typical semi-solid materials from a home as a result of water inundation. So this is really just like the mud, the debris that comes into the home. The gutting is going to be the removal of belongings, damaged materials, couches, porous materials that really suck up water, as well as the construction materials, that's drywall, insulation, all that good stuff that I just mentioned prior. Next. So before you get into mucking and gutting, you want to make sure that you do have the proper safety equipment to just to make sure that you're taking all the proper precautions to protect yourself, to protect whoever might be working in your home, to protect anyone who might be living in the home still. And so the PPE that our team has required is Tyvek suits. It's going to be like a garbage bag that goes over your body essentially to protect your clothing and your person. Respirators with P100 filters. Those are going to be the single piece. It's the next level up from an N95. It's going to be like a single plastic unit, and then they're usually pink filters that are sticking out on the outsides, which are P100s. Those are rated to up to 40 hours of continuous labor. So once you hit around that 40-hour mark, that's when you want to start changing them. Eye protection is a great one to always have because you just never know where projectiles are going to come from, especially in the summertime, with it being so hot and humid and sweaty out. Eye protection can easily be something that people take off, but you just never know what's going to fall into your eyes, and you really want to protect them as much as possible. Hard hats, anything above your head. Nitrile gloves will be helpful if you're spraying any kind of chemicals. Work gloves to protect your hands. Earplugs if you're going to be continuously hitting metal on metal like a hammer on a pry bar. You're definitely going to want to have some earplugs for that. Rubber boots if you have them. If they have steel toe or composite toe, that's going to be an ideal situation. Clorox wipes and hand sanitizer to help you clean off any of your materials and yourself. And then before you really get any work going, you want to make sure that you are preparing your home for the work to be done. So you want to make sure that your home is structurally safe to make sure that you are not like no, you're not working under a massive open hole in your roof. You want to make sure that the foundation hasn't shifted so that way walls aren't coming down. Is the power off before you start making any work so you're not working with active electricity in your home, and the same thing for gas and water, and making sure that you and anyone who is working in your home know where all of these powers, gas and waters on off switches are, just in case something wasn't turned off or you know how to turn it back on. Specifically for gas, don't, if you're turning off your own gas, you never want to turn it back on. You want to consult your local gas company before you turn anything on and have them do it just in case, so that way you don't have a buildup anywhere, and avoid any potential further damage. Next slide, please. The specific tools that you want to use for gutting, these are all pretty basic tools. A lot of households might already have some of these. The biggest ones are going to be utility knives, and making sure that any blades that you're using, you have new blades available because they will get dull. If you're cutting through carpet with a utility blade, one or two passes on an actual like 30 by 30 carpet is going to dull your blade out significantly, and that really just causes more of an ability for y'all to become injured by using dull materials. Hammers, crowbars and pry bars, nail pullers like a cat's paw, tape measures to make sure that you're lining up where you are cutting. Tin snips will be helpful for any metal that you need to be cut through. Chalk lines will keep your edges clean, and a floor scraper in case you need to pull up like any linoleum or vinyl flooring that was glued down. And then when you're actually going through the cleaning process, using brooms, push broom, angle broom, really whatever you have. If you have a dustpan or heavy duty garbage bags are going to be helpful. As opposed to your standard kitchen garbage bags, which will most likely rip under the pressure. The garbage bags, if you are using them, just make sure that you are able to pick them up before you carry them out of the house. A wheelbarrow will be helpful to move anything that's pretty large, as well as a dolly. And then a poly scoop shovel, which is just going to be like a standard, I say snow shovel, I'm from Vermont, but just like a standard shovel that's maybe not metal. It's going to have a bigger basket to pick up debris in. Next slide, please. So how to get all that vegetative debris out of your home. Number one, get an airflow going. If your house was infiltrated by water, there's likely still water inside, especially with the humid temperatures that can happen down south. So you want to get an airflow going. If you can get windows, doors open to make sure that you're getting any of that stagnant air out, and as well as trying to dry out the home a little bit. Remove any mud and small debris with shovels and brooms. Bagging it up or putting it outside into a specific vegetative debris pile. And then you move on to the larger stuff, the bigger furniture, the appliances that may have been impacted. Really looking for anything that would have been damaged by water being exposed to mold, and trying to salvage any of the personal items that didn't take on water or are water resilient. Sometimes older furniture of wood, if it wasn't sitting out for too long, it can be dried out and then it isn't growing mold. Whereas your composite materials, like bookshelves from IKEA, that kind of easy stuff, easy to assemble stuff, is most likely already growing mold if it was impacted and was able to suck up some of that water. Next slide, please. And then you're moving on to the gutting stage. And this is just removing the construction materials that are wet, damaged, moldy. You want to take it off in the opposite way of how you build a home. So it's going to be cabinets, and then you're going to take off trim and doors, which will give you access to drywall, which gives you access to insulation, which gives you access to the flooring. If it's carpeting will want to come up first. But otherwise, other kinds of flooring can be left till the end. Um, and this is going to be all based on how much of this new material needs to get pulled out is going to be based on how much damage came in. So if you only have a small hole in your roof, and there's just a little bit of water damage, you're seeing it located in one single room, then you probably won't need to take off too much, depending on how long it's been sitting there for. Versus if you had a full flood, even 2 inches of water coming all the way through your home, you might need to take out off 2 inches to a foot of drywall, based on how long the water was able to sit in there and before it fully receded or dried up. And that's more of a case by case basis. We offer more. There's a resource slide coming up, and we do offer more explanation on really precisely how to determine what drywall needs to be removed or what level needs to be removed. And if you have any questions, we can talk about that further. But the final step is to remove all of the nails, the screws, and the staples from the studs. That's the inner framing of the walls themselves, and this is going to help you on your next step to mold suppression to remove any mold. And it's just a great way to make sure that you're getting all of the pieces, all of that construction materials like drywall off of the walls and out of the home. Next slide. Thank you. A moisture reader is something that my team uses in every home that we're working on. It's a really useful tool if you're facing a lot of water damage. It's the kind of thing that if a neighborhood was flooded out and is working through, not everyone needs to purchase a moisture reader, especially if it's a cost that is just not going to be helpful for you at this moment. But if one home in the neighborhood purchases one, and everyone can share it. It's not a tool that everyone is going to need to have one on hand. But a moisture reader really just tells you how much moisture is still in the walls. It tells you what the level of moisture is in the home itself. So you can get an understanding for how much drywall needs to be taken off, how long the home needs to dry out for. The space that you're looking for is between 0 and 16% is considered dry, or is an acceptable level of dry that it will be able to dry out before mold starts to grow. 17% is my cutoff number, that's my magic number. And then anything above that, 18% or higher, is considered wet. So if it's 18% or higher, that's material that I know is not going to dry out in a timely fashion for mold growth not to start. If anything is above 18%, it's likely that mold growth has started, and that's materials that I want to be removing from the home itself. And so this is good if you have a wall that was impacted. You can use the prongs on the moisture reader to stick into the wall. It has a wood versus a building material setting. So drywall is a building material. You can stick it into the wall and really poke around your wall to see the extent of the moisture and the damage. So if you had 2 feet of flooding and it's a week later and you go to that 3 foot mark and it's reading 16%, then you probably don't need to take up more than 2 or 3 feet of drywall. Versus if you had the 2 feet of flooding and you're poking it at 6 feet and it's still reading at a 30% level, likely that entire wall will need to be taken out. And same thing with we'll talk a little bit more when we get to mold suppression, but same thing with the wooden frames on the inside with the studs. Next slide, please. So these are some examples of flooding damage, and they're both different. The one on the left here you can see is from actual flooding damage. You can see where that mold growth is growing. That looks to me to be about 2 feet, maybe a little less than that. So I'm going to instruct my team to be taking up to that 4 foot mark. I usually shoot for about a foot above where the water line was sitting at, and that gives me a good amount of space to capture all of the potential mold growth and remove it. The longer the home has been sitting and the more flooding was impacted, the more likely that mold growth is going to creep up a little bit towards that red line. And so that way you can determine, so this is a point where I would use the moisture reader and put it up somewhere where that red line is coming through to get an understanding if you need to take off that full 4 feet if it's at above 17%. The picture on the right hand side, you can see very clearly on the ceiling the water damage. So likely this roof was impacted a lot of water infiltration. So the blue line is showing where the water damage is stopping, but the red line is where I'm going to be looking to with my moisture reader to get an understanding of how much water has soaked through that ceiling and if the entire ceiling needs to come down, or if we're able to cut it at the red line and prevent taking off too much drywall. So this way you have the ability to build back your home with less construction materials needed. We don't want to take off anything more than needs to be, and so that way it makes the rebuild process just that much quicker and that much more cost effective for you. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Mold suppression. Mold suppression is going to be the next step. Once you've fully gutted your home, you're moving on to looking at just the studs in your walls, the framework itself. And so this is where ideally we've removed all of the wet materials that could have the ability to foster mold growth. And now we want to treat the leftover materials that we don't want to get rid of, which is going to be the studs left on the inside of the home. So mold suppression itself is using chemicals and other equipment like dehumidifiers, fans, air scrubbers to remove abnormal mold and mildew growth. Specifically, we want to be using EPA registered fungicides. If there's something that you want to walk away from this, there's a lot of things, a lot of information to walk away from this presentation with, but the EPA registered fungicide is a huge one. It's very common that folks think that bleach is going to be sufficient to kill mold, and that's just not true. It has the ability to remove mildew and it has the ability to remove surface level mold, but it does not have the ability to kill mold that is infiltrated into materials like wood, like your studs. And so EPA registered fungicides, we use concrobium at SPP for the most part, but you have Fiberlock and Shockwave as well. And those are able to infiltrate the materials that you're working with, the studs most likely, and really kill all of the mold that is beginning to grow there. Next slide. And some other common myths, besides just the bleach, that bleach is going to be the most effective. Mold suppression is also known as mold remediation. Remediation itself is receiving a certificate from a licensed professional, and it's often communicated that it's required to have mold remediation done. However, that's just not true, and a lot of mold remediators will tell you that it's required, but you want to check into your insurance and really get an understanding of what they expect, because it's very likely that mold suppression is going to be just as fine. Mold suppression, you just won't have a certificate at the end by a licensed professional saying that this home is cleared of mold. But if you follow our step by steps, you're able to kill the mold just as effectively, and volunteer groups are able to do the exact same thing. Going right along with that, has to be inspected is also a common myth. Again, check in with your insurance and see what they require. But oftentimes, if they're not requiring mold remediation, then they're also not requiring it to be inspected either. Finally, any exposure to mold can be hazardous to your health. It is true that any level of mold can be hazardous to your health. You want to make sure that you are taking all the proper precautions for short-term and long-term health impacts from mold itself. If you just walk into a home that has some mold growing, and you're not wearing PPE, it's not great. You might experience some allergy-like symptoms. But if you are younger or you are an elderly person, someone who might be already immunocompromised, you'll also likely feel effects from the mold. It's the long-term exposure that will be the most dangerous, and that's why we're so careful to explain the mold suppression process, because you don't want to have mold growing in your home, remove all the materials, suppress your home for mold, but only do it part of the way or incomplete, and then rebuild with new construction materials like drywall, and then continue to have mold growth where you can't see it and can't access it anymore. So taking the time to go through it and go through it slowly is going to be helpful, so that way you can guarantee that your family, your household is no longer going to be exposed to the impacts of mold. Next slide. The first thing you want to make sure you do before you suppress for mold is making sure that the home is fully closed in. So if you had roof damage, if you have broken windows, if you have broken doors, if you have any way that water can infiltrate into your home or still is actively infiltrating, you want to take care of that before you start the suppression process, for the exact same reason. If you start the process before you cover your roof with a tarp or get it fixed, then you still have the ability to take on more water, and you can start the whole mold growth process again after you've already suppressed for it. The other step is making sure that the moisture level is low enough. That's 17% against the magic number. And the same thing, after 17%, the lower you go, it's not possible for mold to grow underneath 17%, or the materials will be able to dry out effectively without continuing the mold growth. If it's anything higher than that and you suppress for mold growth, then it's the exact same situation. You're leaving yourself at risk to having that mold come back, or to not killing all of it, and then you cover it up with drywall again, and you'll never know, but you're now living in a home that's growing active mold. And you really just have to do the whole process all over again. Next slide, please. So PPE that you want to be wearing and how to take it off when you are suppressing for mold. It's going to be work gloves, if you have them, nitrile gloves if you're going to be spraying for the concrobium or the shockwave, the chemicals. A Tyvek suit is going to be important. The fungicides that we discussed earlier are not going to, if it gets on your skin, it's not going to be significantly hazardous. However, you don't want to be exposing yourself to chemicals like that. Once you spray the concrobium, you want to leave the home for about 24 hours or so. So it's not the worst thing in the world to be exposed to, but you want to take all the proper precautions that you can. That way you mitigate any further hazards. Eye protection, respirators are also going to be just as useful. And when you are taking this PPE off, you want to make sure that you're throwing all the contaminated consumables in a garbage that's outside of the home. So not just in your kitchen garbage, because that way you're just really leaving the mold spores in the home itself. And you want to separate all of that exposure. Anything that's like a hard plastic is a not porous material. You can wipe off with you can wipe down with disinfecting wipes. This is when bleach is acceptable to use because it's just surface level. Spores, if you have like leather or cloth gloves that you were using, you want to wash those. And then making sure you're washing your own hands using hand sanitizer, getting into the shower as soon as possible. So that way you're removing any of your continued exposure to both live and dead mold spores. Next slide, please. And then just a quick how-to. We have, again, resources to show you exactly how this all looks, but you want to scrub the exposed wood with a wire brush, and that is exactly what it sounds like. Just scrubbing up and down. If you're causing the wood to be impacted, you can see the streaks coming through. You're probably scrubbing a little bit too hard. The idea of scrubbing the wood is just to open up the pores of the wood itself, so that way when you come to spray the concrobium or the shockwave, you it the those chemicals are able to get into the wood itself. Once you've scrubbed, we like to mark it with an X so that way we can guarantee that that side of the stud was scrubbed, and you want to make sure any of the exposed wood you were scrubbing as best as possible, scrubbing in multiple directions to kind of get that crisscross pattern going. And then once it's all scrubbed, and you've fully scrubbed the entire area that will need to be suppressed, you want to spray with the fungicide. You do want to make sure that you're being liberal in your application, but if you look at the stud and it is fully dripping chemicals, then it's a little bit too much and you want to go maybe a little bit slower on a different setting. Um, the fungicide itself, if you spray it and then you leave that stud and you come back 5 minutes later and it looks like it's completely dry, you probably haven't sprayed enough and you might want to do a second coat with that one. A final step, if you have the ability to, is wipe all of the wood down, so that way you're taking any of those excess mold spores out, and then any of those X's that you marked, you want to circle to indicate that they've been fully sprayed. Once you apply the concrobium, the home is going to want to sit for about 24 hours before anyone goes into that, if it's a specific room or the entire home, just to, as a precaution, just to make sure that you're not exposing yourself to chemicals unnecessarily. And then you want to do a final clean. So you want to get it, if you have a shop vac, that's going to be the best to get all those out. But if a broom is what you have, then a broom is what you can work with. You can also take a bucket of water with a little bit of bleach in it, and dilute it, and then just also do a final, once you have everything fully swept and you're satisfied, you can then take a mop to the floors as well, just to make sure that, again, you're removing as much of that mold spores as possible, so that way you are removing any chance of any continued mold growth once you start the rebuild process. Next slide, please. And then the next steps, after mold suppression, you should notice that it doesn't smell like mold anymore if you were experiencing kind of that mildewy, musty smell, and that you're not seeing any mold growing anymore. You want to give it 24 to 48 hours to dry out completely, and then you can come back and check out if you have a moisture reader, to get below that 17%. If you have the ability to say it, if you have the ability to start rebuilding the next day, in some sort of process, you just want to make sure that the rebuild isn't happening until the home is properly dried out. So that way you're making sure that you are not exposing yourself to that continued mold growth. And then check in with your buildings department, your insurance, just to make sure that any inspections before you start the rebuild process, that might need to be done are done, or if you even have any, or if you're able to just start going. You want to make sure that you're covering all of those bases. That way, you're not wasting your time, your energy, your money, to move forward in the rebuild before you have all of your ducks in a row. Next slide. And then this is a list of our resources. We have all of these linked on our website, and then also on the YouTube page as well, so you can see the actual process of like what mucking and gutting looks like and what mold suppression looks like. Next slide, and I think I pass it back to you, Mackenzie.
Perfect. Thank you, Juliet. So the last section of this presentation is avoiding contractor fraud. So ideally, if we're like walking along the timeline of this presentation, at this point, you have perhaps finished mold suppression, finished muck and gut, if that is relevant to the needs in your home. And now you're looking at beginning some of the more larger projects. And to do that, you're likely going to need a contractor. So we want to make sure that when you're choosing a contractor that you're as diligent as possible in your search and you're watching out for any warning signs that maybe this person isn't necessarily as qualified as they say to be or who they say to be. And so Um, there's a few ways to help navigate this process to ensure that you end up with the contractor who's going to do a wonderful job in repairing your home and making it safe for many years to come. One way to do this is to consult trusted sources. So if you have family and friends who maybe had like a new roof put in last year, um, and that roof, like made it good through the storm, that might be a good route to follow. If you don't know anyone that's had to work with a contractor lately, that's also okay. And local building associations or the Chamber of Commerce or even the Better Business Bureau could be good places to find and vet contractors um, that you may find throughout your search. We also always recommend getting at least 2 written estimates, ideally even 3, so that way you can really, like, cross compare and make sure that one person isn't overcharging you or undercharging you. Undercharging can be just as big of a warning sign as overcharging, because, I mean, there's a lot of things, especially when it comes to material, that unfortunately they cost what they cost, and so if someone is saying they can, buy all the materials for a quarter of the price, that's likely not to be legitimate. Um, they're also sometimes going to try to be sneaky and try to understand like how much money you have to spend, and that can sometimes lead to an estimate that is at or above the amount of your settlement or FEMA funds. And so again, good reason to get multiple estimates so you can compare prices, make sure they're not overcharging you, but also just to make sure that you are getting a fair price. It's better to just keep that amount of funds close to your chest so you're getting like the most reasonable estimates. Um, and if you do experience fraud, please, please, please file a police report and file a claim against your contractor. If you do not file a police report, there really is no record or proof that you experienced this contractor fraud. And so this is just, again, like with that paper trail I was talking about earlier, this just helps to continue to have that paper trail. So if you do end up needing to apply for charitable aid, like through a disaster recovery organization, because you no longer have your insurance funds due to contractor fraud, having proof of a police report or having proof of a claim that you filed against your contractor can help to build the case for them to be able to provide you some of their some like nonprofit funds for your recovery. Um, Other than just consulting trusted sources, if you do, identify a contractor on your own, or even if it is a contractor that that maybe a friend of yours used, things to be concerned about is if they're unwilling or unable to show you their ID, their licensing, or their insurance. If they won't provide you estimates in writing, again, paper trail is so important. We need to have it written down exactly what they're charging you and for what they're charging you and what they're agreeing to do and by what time, and all of that needs to be written down. Um, if they demand the full payment before work or request payment in cash or ask you to sign over your claim check, those are all not the norm, not the way that contractors should or typically work. And they're definitely red flags that should maybe make you take a step back and reevaluate if this is the contract you want to move forward with. And if they solicit door to door or ask for a deposit to hold your place in line throughout that process, those are also red flags. Soliciting door to door after disaster, contractors should have more than enough work. They shouldn't need to be out in the community looking for work. It should probably be pouring into the doors for them. And then asking for a deposit to hold your place in line. It's just not the normal practice, and should definitely. That's one of the reasons we're sharing it, is just so you know that it's not typical and should not be expected. Before you hire a contractor, something that can help to make sure you're informed in the initial conversations is knowing the licensing and permitting needs. So, for example, if you're getting a roof replaced, roof repairs are almost always going to require a permit. If you hear, local rumors that there's no permits required or permits are waived, that's not true. You're going to need a permit, and you're going to need an inspection and make sure that that roof is up to code. So, if a contractor tells you, "Oh no, like don't worry about it, I've got it," you don't have to worry about that, like, the legal, reasons for doing a permit. "Don't worry, I'll fix your roof." That is another reason to take a step back or reevaluate if this is the contract you wanna work with, because there are things that do have licensing and permit requirements. Electricity is one of them, sometimes plumbing is one of them. So just knowing what exactly is required in your city or county can help to navigate conversations and make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and are communicating the needs and advocating for yourself as best as possible. Um, General contractors are also required to have general liability business insurance, so that's another thing you can request, just as, again, a way to establish legitimacy. Within Texas, there is a license search for plumbers, electricians, and HVAC contractors. So you can go ahead and go to this website if you do identify a contractor you want to work with and see if they are registered with the state of Texas. And if they are not registered, we suggest that you look to find a couple of other options. Once you do identify a contractor, or and begin moving forward with like the scope of work, and deciding on what needs to be done, you want to make sure, again, in that the theme of the paper trail, we want a detailed scope of work that is printed out on paper, and we want a schedule with milestones. So we want the roof to be completed by August 10th, and at that time we will pay 50% of the cost, and we want the flooring to could be complete by September 10th, and at that point, we'll pay the rest of the 50% provided that all of the inspections are passed. So you want all of that written out so it's all agreed upon very early on. And that way, if they're not living up to the expectations, you have a very clear line to say, I do not have to pay you this amount because you have not lived up to your side of the agreement. You're also going to want documentation for release of lien. Some contractors will place a lien on the home while the repairs are being done to ensure that they are, paid at the end. But you're going to want to understand the process of how that's going to be released and when it will be released. Um, and then make sure you have an agreement on how the home inspection will be complete and when it will be complete. And you do not want to sign off on anything until you know the inspection is complete and everything has passed with the code, and everything is working. And then you also want to have that warranty in hand before you sign off on the project as being complete, or before you and as far as the earlier, scope of work and schedule, you don't want to sign on to agreeing to work with a contractor either until you are comfortable with those. And then once all of that is signed, agreed upon, you feel good and comfortable about it, like please make sure you feel comfortable about it. You then want to manage the process carefully. So never pay in cash or in full up front. We want to make sure the contractor has incentive to come back and put in their best effort. We want to check on progress in person as frequently as you're able. So, go over to the house if you're not living in it during the repairs and make sure everything looks like it's being completed on schedule. If there's something that you see when you stop by the house that doesn't look like it was done quite right, or looks like it was maybe done haphazardly, feel free to call the contractor, pause work until they can come and address your concerns. And then never issue final payment until all work is completed and passes inspection. So if you understand when home inspection is supposed to happen and what needs to be inspected, that can also help to ensure that you don't pay before everything is fully complete and has passed the required inspections. So that completes our presentation for today. So if you do have any questions, you can reach us at partner@sbpusa.org, and I will answer your questions or direct you to a member of our team that can answer your question. And then we also recommend checking out this QR code, which will bring you to SBP's resource hub, which has guides and lots of more information to help with your recovery process. Thank you all for attending, and if you have any questions, you can drop it in the chat.